So, good evening, and I hope everybody is well tonight and settling in for our talk. Or if you're listening to this later, thank you for making the time and to celebrate that for yourself because taking time for yourself is always a super important thing. And especially when we're on a healing journey. And that's essentially what we're all doing here in transforming MS naturally. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Teri Jaklin. I'm a naturopathic doctor for the last 20 years, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis myself since 1985. So I wanted to start tonight with just a just a lovely comment that I got about last week's Wednesday live. And it's from Tanis. And thank you so much, Tanis, for sending this in. And Tanis just says, thank you. She said, just got the replay. So many great nuggets. I'm glad to hear. Thank you. Your description of settling in really resonates with me. I was in information gathering mode that you spoke of for a long time and have transitioned now to settling into a routine with establishing sustainable habits. Thank you for all the great information and for your encouragement and the talks you provide. So that's wonderful. And I'm really, really grateful to you for that, Tanis. And one thing that really stuck out to me from Tanis's message was the words really resonated with me because that's really one of the things we've got to look for in this life because there's an overwhelming abundance of stuff out there. Everybody who ever felt better from eating a green smoothie has considered themselves a health expert and has all kinds of stuff to sell you. And, there's resonating, the things that resonate with you listening to the heart center, not just the brain center, right? There are 40,000 brain cells on the heart. So the heart and brain creates a network that drives our intuition. So resonating with you is really about that intuition, isn't it? Thank you so much for that, Tanis. Before we start, I have a couple of housekeeping items for you. Um, I'm very excited to announce a master class that I'm going to be doing on Saturday, March the 4th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so that we can have our folks on the West Coast as well as East Coast and even in Europe join us. So put that on your schedule now, and you'll learn more about that. Hi, Debbie. So that's a master class that I'm going to do on Saturday, March the 4th. A master class allows us to dive deeper into some things, and this one specifically, we're going to talk about getting you started on your journey, overcoming the being stuck, how to create lasting change. And I'm going to share my 4 cornerstones of health with you, which are the beginning of setting a foundation. So we're going to have fun. And that is going to be on Saturday, March the 4th. And then, of course, we've got my next Transform MS, the live 10-week program starting on March the 20th, which means registration will close the week prior to that. So stay tuned. This is a limited enrollment program. It's a small group program, and our group is growing. So if you need more information, reach out to register for the master class and to take a look at the Transform MS program. You can go to www.transform.ms. So that brings us to tonight's topic, which is all about a new understanding of MS and neutralizing the threat. So let's dive into that a little bit. We're going to talk a bit about why this is an exciting time. So along the lines of creating a new understanding of MS, we're going to talk about what is MS? Uh, anyway, and then our last point, we're going to talk directly to neutralizing that threat. So I'm very guilty of saying this, and people call me on it all the time, and that's okay. But I often say that this is a very exciting time to be diagnosed. I'm not saying that it's exciting to be diagnosed with MS, but if you have to be diagnosed with MS, now is a very good time for that because everything is changing. And what we're starting to see is that MS can actually be a very manageable condition. And this goes directly against what we're told, right? You go to the neurologist says, no, there's nothing else out there that you can do. Some of them are really clever and think maybe you should be taking a little bit of vitamin D, but for all intents and purposes, we still don't even hear them talking about nutrition, and that research goes back to the 40s. But that's called dogma. That's, if you don't know the word dogma, I love the word dogma. Just has so much character to it. Dogma is the general thought of the time. And I want to do a little walk down memory lane for you. In this time now where science is actually coming together with traditional medicine, but science is so far away from the doctor's office. And I want to just take you on a little stroll down memory lane to understand how that works in our current medical model, because people think science and medicine are the same thing, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So what happens when you go against commonly held beliefs? You can probably think of a few answers yourself, but a really good example in the medical world is, I think, one that we can all relate to, and that was Dr. Schimmel in the mid 1800s. And, he was a doctor who came up with this very exciting idea at the time. Well, he thought it was exciting anyway, that maybe if we washed our hands between the autopsy suite and the delivery room, our infant mortality would go down. And so he started doing little studies, and sure enough, his evidence pointed to the fact that if we washed our hands between the autopsy suite and the delivery room, infant mortality would be reduced. Well, you would think that everybody would be as excited as he was about it, but that was not the case because it railed against the dogma of the time. And so he was ostracized. He was called a quack. He lost his license to practice medicine. He was even thrown in jail, where he was very quickly, within the first 2 weeks of being in jail, beaten to death for this crazy idea, which he thought was very exciting, that now has become so commonplace. Can you imagine a surgeon not scrubbing for 11 minutes before, and then putting rubber gloves on before he went into surgery? Never mind coming from the autopsy suite. So, this is an example of how something we take for granted now was one of those crazy ideas at some point, right? Moving it more into modern days, I remember when in the 80s, the early 80s, I had an ulcer. And of course, the dogma of the day was that ulcers were caused by excessive stomach acid chewing through your intestines. And my doctor was treating me with this new crazy idea that it was a bacteria called H. pylori. And well, now, what is that, 40 years later, 45 years later, we know H. pylori is the cause of ulcers. So once again, going against what was generally held as to be true with a new science, right? And that's where we are today. And the most modern doctors now just wait until they retire, and then they reveal what they have seen from a research perspective. And I think something that impacts all of us with this example is Dr. George Ebers, who was the head of research for the disease modifying therapies at Oxford University in England for 25 years. And He came out after he retired to say, this is what I want to see in good research. This is what I saw in the studies we did. It didn't add up to good science. Therefore, there's not a lot of goodness happening in those disease modifying therapies for people with multiple sclerosis. So, big shifts in thinking that might not be accepted. You might be all excited about doing things a new way, and then your husband doesn't think so, or your mother doesn't think so, or the babysitter chimes in, or your mother in law has something to say about it. There's always people that are kind of poking at you um, not to do anything. Just do what your doctor says. Just do what your neurologist. Why don't you just go on those drugs? And that doesn't resonate with people. So this is what I call the therapeutic gap, where the new science is this incredibly bright light on the horizon, but the current medical model keeps us stuck in the old dogma, right? Which is, oh, you can't, there's nothing else you can do. You better get on these drugs right away, or you're just going to get worse. You're just going to get worse. And nothing exciting about that. And nothing really even current about that. What's current? What's current is the science of nutrition. What's current is the new neuroscience and the role that the brain, the power of the mind, the capacity of the brain to heal itself, you know, exercise science. And what's really interesting is all of this science is being put behind things that are also considered traditional medicine. And when I say traditional medicine, I'm talking about naturopathic medicine. I'm talking about Ayurvedic medicine. I'm talking about models of medicine that have been around for hundreds and in some cases thousands of years. And just FYI, our current medical model has been around for about 150 years. That's about it. So it's there, it's real, and it's yours to discover. And when you jump into it, it gets overwhelming, doesn't it? So there's so much going on right now. You don't know what is this bright light and what are these people who got better after drinking a green smoothie. So I understand the confusion there. But that's the first part of understanding that I wanted to share with you. The next part of understanding I want to share with you is, what is MS anyway? We get diagnosed, and then we run away and look to fix it. But nobody really stops and says, well, what is actually going on? Because this is a pretty fantastic machine with a lot of redundancy systems to be able to adapt to change. So when something gets diagnosed, there's a process behind it. It didn't happen yesterday. The diagnosis might have happened yesterday, but the process driving that, or the process behind that diagnosis, may have been going on for years, or in some cases, it might go right back to life in your mother's womb. So it's different for everybody, right? So what is MS? In the simplest terms, it's this inappropriate immune response that is creating inflammation and autoinflammation, which is playing itself out in the brain. And we feel the symptoms of MS because the brain is not a great place to have a disease playing out, because it's such a complex organ that governs just about everything that's going on in our body. So this is where everybody heads. The disease modifying agents are meant to hammer this inappropriate immune response without period treating the underlying cause of that inappropriate immune response. So what are some of the causes of MS? The single cause theory doesn't exist. And it certainly doesn't exist with MS. So what could be causing MS? Any combination of vitamin D deficiency, latent infection, inappropriate detoxification, poor digestion, frequent antibiotic use, malnutrition, it goes on and on and on and on. And I have a slide that I use when I'm teaching that has all of these things. But ultimately, that inappropriate immune response is driven by things that are the sum total of your experience and exposure, um, and your body's ability to deal with that. So, as you can see, that would be different for everybody. Um, and when you see that model, it's the inappropriate immune response causing inflammation, playing itself out in the brain. You can see that running around for a fix just isn't going to work, because what are you fixing? Which part are you fixing? And and each one of those parts is in itself very complex. So that's why I encourage people, if you're taking stuff, make sure you know what part of that model you're working with. And you don't always want to be working on one end or the other. You've got to be working on all of them together. So it's, that is MS in a nutshell. Of course, it's much more complicated than that. I've lectured on what is MS itself for an hour in my lifetime. But that gives you a little bit of an idea. So we've got this exciting new time with lots of options for people with MS. We've got an understanding of what is MS, that inappropriate immune response causing inflammation, playing itself out in the brain. So then it comes to, how do we neutralize the threat? And the threat, I suppose, could be a number of things, but of course, the threat of the MS itself, the threat of what it could possibly do to you. But neutralizing that threat becomes in creating an empowered understanding. And I say empowered understanding. Remember last week we talked about stop all the information gathering and take action, you know? And even if you don't think you're doing the best thing, take action. Just do something. There's something in all of those notes you've taken and all of those summits you've attended that surely you can start doing. Well, that's when you create that understanding, because understanding and wisdom comes with experience of doing things and thinking things through, right? That becomes a pivotal point. And that's the point when everything changes. When you go from scrambling to collect information and fix, to being able to sit down and say, okay, and lay a plan, lay a trajectory for where you want to go with this. Um, and of course, a new understanding creates new thoughts, creates new beliefs, new emotions, and new emotions create new actions, and new actions lead to a new physical reality. And that's really a good sequence. Actually, you should write that one down, right? So, what was that? That was new thoughts that create new beliefs, that, what did I say? Create new emotions. So, thoughts, beliefs, emotions that create new habits, actions, and habits that then create your new physical reality. Because ultimately, that's what we all want, right? We want to create that new physical reality. So try it out. If you're facing MS in fear, so think about it. If you're afraid, and I hear it all the time, I'm anxiety and stress is through the roof because I'm diagnosed with MS. So if you're facing MS in fear, what does that look like? So let's go through that sequence that we just said. So you believe there's nothing you can do because your neurologist maybe told you that, right? Or maybe your mother said, oh, please just go on those drugs. And that's not really resonating with you, right? You're going to get worse. You're going to be handicapped. There's nothing you can do. So that's what you start to believe, right? Then emotionally, what happens? It's kind of a bummer, right? So you end up getting depressed or anxious, or you just don't believe that there's anything you can do, and maybe you're angry and overwhelmed, right? There's that overwhelmed word again. So, what do you think natural actions would be coming from those emotions, right? Um, I would say inertia is probably the first one, or no action at all, right? And if there is no action, um, that's what's driving your habits. So this is where we get into no healthy routines. We get into sitting on the sofa watching Netflix all afternoon, and you sleep in the morning. You don't know, you have a different bedtime every time you go to bed at night. And guess what? That's the community. That's the emotions and the beliefs and the actions that build the community. What do they say? You are the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. That's pretty interesting. So if you're looking to shift, if you're looking to pivot, maybe you start looking at the 5 people that you hang around with the most, right? Because if we're stuck in a funk with these emotions and these behaviors, guess what? Guess what we're looking for on MS? We join every MS sucks group there is out there. And that's certainly just creating more of the same. So it becomes like a rinse and repeat situation. And guess what? You're stuck in the fear, which is what started the whole cascade in the first place. So rinse and repeat, right? This is where um, this is where we can step in and start to change things. And I like to think uh, of sort of life in the terms of, are you sitting in a car, in the passenger seat of a car that's on autopilot? So in that completely, I have no control over this situation, right? We all think about 60,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot of thoughts. That's a lot of thinking. And guess what? Most of them are negative because that is the nature of human psychology. It'll go to the negative first, and the vast majority of those thoughts that are driving that cascade that we were just talking about are the same thoughts we had yesterday. So that's quite something. And that means that the first step comes down to one of the biggest factors in MS, which is the stress response. When and when you're in the stress response, your healing is on hold. Your body doesn't do any healing when you're in the stress response. A fundamental shift comes with the realization that you can do a lot to change this trajectory, that you do have more control than you realize, and that your body is infinitely wise. We just need to catch those negative beliefs and start to change them. And you can catch those in any moment. Catch yourself being negative and flip it on its ear. You know, even if it's something crazy like sunny skies or something that just totally gets you out of that negative funk. Maybe it's a word, maybe it's an action, maybe it's a thought. But understanding that this is a journey, right? It's not a flip the switch, quick fix situation. So I'll leave you with that, and keep learning, keep applying, keep reaching out, because this is not a journey you should embark on your own. Like any monumental quest, for example, climbing Mount Everest, you have a guide and you have a camp of people and you have other people that you're going through this with. And that community that you choose based on how you see the world is going to be as helpful to you as the guides that you choose, your own mental state. So it's a big picture. It's a big picture to paint. And I understand that. I understand that. So I'm so delighted that you joined me tonight. Hi, Tanya. I'm glad you needed this today. Tanya, I think you may have missed my saying that I'm doing a masterclass on Saturday, March the 4th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll be able to dive into a lot more of these things. And once again, we're going to talk about getting started on your journey, overcoming the getting stuck thing, creating lasting change. I'm going to share my cornerstones of health with you that start to lay a super solid foundation. So I'm excited about it. I hope
it's on Zoom, so you have to register.
Oh, it's on Zoom, so you have to register. So you can do that at www.transform.ms. So there you go. I hope you have a bit more of an understanding of MS, a bit of more support, like Tanis in her lovely feedback this morning. And I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye bye.